You've decided you're ready to become a parent, and suddenly you're overwhelmed with people who feel they have the right to inform you on the correct way to conceive, give birth, what fears you should have, and the proper way to parent. How do you filter through the opinions? How do you know what's trustworthy information and what's a myth or just plain outdated? Welcome to the PRYT podcast. Join your host Michelle Smith and her guests as they cut through the noise and fear by sharing valuable tips, tools, and proven methods that help you connect with your own inner wisdom as you navigate the sacred journey that is pregnancy, birth, and parenthood in a more relaxed and confident manner. This podcast does not constitute, nor is it intended, as medical advice.
Hello, PRYT families. Welcome to your reprieve from the noise and the stress that can so often accompany pregnancy, birth, and parenthood. I'm your host, Michelle Smith. On today's podcast, I will be having a blessed conversation with Stephanie Smith regarding the benefits of yoga for pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and beyond. Stephanie is an Orlando-based yoga instructor specializing in pre- and postnatal yoga. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Sports and Exercise Science from the University of Central Florida and is an E-RYT, PRYT yoga teacher with Yoga Alliance. Her love of yoga and travel has taken her to Thailand numerous times, where she has had the privilege of studying yoga extensively at Centered Yoga. As a mother herself, Stephanie has an understanding of how the yoga practice evolves during pregnancy and postpartum. She strives to create an environment of support for fellow mothers to know that they are not alone on the beautiful, yet sometimes rocky journey that is motherhood. Welcome, Stephanie, to the PRYT podcast. I'm so happy and grateful to be here with you today.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for having me on. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Before we explore the benefits of a yoga practice during pregnancy and postpartum, would you please share a bit about what yoga is for those that might be unfamiliar with it, and what drew you to becoming a teacher?
Yes, of course. I find that is a really common question for a lot of people that are new to the yoga practice. And I feel that there's a misrepresentation of what yoga is in our modern society today. A lot of times all these fancy yoga poses are being glamorized through social media, and that is so far removed from what the purpose of our yoga practice truly is. The definition of yoga is union, and that's the union of our mind, our body, our breath. So ideally, movement of the body, where we're not having to think about what it is that we're wanting to do, but we're just following the breath, almost intuitively guided movement. That is, in its essence, what yoga is. What drew me to the practice was just me having a desire to prepare myself for a surf trip that we were doing to Costa Rica. I knew that I was going to be in some heavier surf that I wasn't used to experiencing here on the Florida coast. And so I wanted to prepare myself mentally as well as physically, particularly with the breath work itself. And so I stepped on my mat about 20 years ago. Since then, it's just kind of ebbed and flowed throughout my life. I went through a period where I was practicing Ashtanga, and that's a very rigorous practice. It's traditionally done 6 days a week, anywhere from 1 to 2 hours a day. And you really only have days of rest on new moons and full moons. Then when I became pregnant, I needed something that was a little bit lighter and that was going to support all the changes that I was experiencing during my pregnancy. And then after the birth of my daughter, there was no longer that need for that vigorous practice. And so that's where I moved into a more gentler space, a gentler flow, just allowing my body that time that it needed to rest and to heal from everything that I had experienced in this new journey into motherhood. So what drew me into becoming a teacher was the desire to share my experiences on my mat with those who were in search of their own healing through the practice of yoga.
So how do you feel that it benefited you during your own pregnancy? Because that seems to be what has shaped your practice in some ways.
So yes, my yoga practice helped me in so many ways during my pregnancy. It prepared my body physically for the day that I was bringing my little one earthside, but it was a wonderful support for the subtle body as well. When we think of the subtle body, we're thinking of the emotional, the energetic body. And during pregnancy, there's such a flux of everything that we're feeling, oftentimes heightened by that wonderful surge during pregnancy of our hormones, and then postpartum, that joyful plummet as well. So with being connected to what it was that I was feeling, I was able to come to my mat, use the breath, use the movement to really help me process all the variety of emotions that were stirring during that time.
And I love that you said that, because I feel that women, when they're pregnant, they're just more open. And so in that openness, I think we're more vulnerable to other people's stories, other people's opinions, other people's thoughts, just walking through the grocery store even, because strangers stop you and have to give their opinion about if your belly's too big or too small, and where you should give birth and how you should give birth. And so having a way to work through that and to even in some ways protect our energy from being bombarded. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Very much so. And I was very aware of this during my pregnancy, and I had to make that conscious decision that I was not going to allow other people's thoughts, feelings affect my birth plan and what I wanted to experience during my pregnancy as well. So a lot of times I would even apologize. I'm like, I'm sorry. I would really love to be here for you, but what you are discussing is not supporting me, and it's not supporting my body and my baby during this time. So I'm going to respectfully ask you to perhaps not continue this conversation at this time.
That is so wonderful. I wish all women had, what word do I want? That capacity to be able to say, no, I don't want to hear your scary story, because we're just taught to be polite, or sometimes you get blindsided, that type of thing. So thank you for sharing that with our audience, because it's so important. You don't have to listen to anyone's birth story. So from your pregnancy, though, you also trained to not only teach prenatal yoga, but to be a prenatal instructor to instructors, right? I don't know what to call that. I'm sorry.
Yes. So I am registered with Yoga Alliance to teach other people how to become yoga instructors as well. And I just felt more so here in the States, I find there's a wonderful level of support for those women who are in Europe, Canada, elsewhere in the world, but we're really lacking that here in the States. In the States, it's all very medical based. And so I was really passionate about helping form that community for women who didn't want to just have to follow what it was that was technically the norm here. I wanted women to know that they have options, that this is their body, their pregnancy, their experience, and I wanted them to feel that sense of power. And I feel that you can really connect with that power within yourself through the yoga practice. And so I just had that really strong desire. How can I create this support? How can I be of support to women who are in search of it, not pushing my agenda, my opinions on them, but if they are searching for this is something that they are desiring, how can I provide that for them? And I can only teach so many classes a week. And so that's where a lot of times I find doulas, they want to be able to also offer yoga for their women that they are working with. And so that's where that kind of came into play.
So to train the doulas as yoga instructors themselves, correct?
Correct. And anybody who teaches yoga as well that would just have a desire to also become a pre and postnatal yoga instructor.
So can you tell me more about the benefits of yoga during pregnancy in preparation for birth and postpartum?
Of course. So there's a lot that's going on with the physical body during the 9 months that we are pregnant. And then also, too, you want to look at the postpartum period as 9 months as well. And with regards to the physical aspects, our body in itself has to shift to everything that's going on. So our hormones are now changing. We're having a huge influx of particularly progesterone coming into the body. We also have the hormone relaxin, which is allowing the ligaments, the tendons to begin to soften a little bit. So this way, the pelvis itself can actually move apart to create space for the baby to be born. Also, too, when we're looking at the abdominal muscles, particularly with regards to the transverse abdominis, so we're looking at the abdominals from below the navel, also, too, above the navel, rectus abdominis here. These abdominals have to separate in order to make room for the life that we are creating within. And I always like to joke with my mamas that come to class about all the fun things that are going on inside the physical body. It's like your liver kind of gets shifted over here, your stomach gets shifted over here, your poor intestines, they just get dropped somewhere in the bunch. So there's a whole lot that's going on in the body. And so the physical aspect of it is we are working to strengthen the pelvic floor. We are working to strengthen the abdominals. So that way, postpartum, there will be a lesser degree of what we call diastasis recti, where that's the separation of the abdominals. So it's going to make it easier for those abdominals to draw back together. Plus, we're creating strength and support through the hips, through the legs. And these are going to be our tools during that day that we're bringing our baby earthside. This is where we're going to find that strength, find that power to come into those deep lunges, those deep squats, and just really tapping into strengthening all of those components that are going to be so beneficial and helping us on that day.
I do have to say that I was blessed to be at Stephanie's birth as her doula, and she took my birthies classes with me, and she was absolutely amazing. And all of that strength training really helped her to push her daughter out very effectively. I think she shocked all of us in the room. But it was the most beautiful, one of the most beautiful births I've attended. It really was. And she went so inward and had an unmedicated birth through an induction. Now, she was fortunate because she dilated quickly, but it was truly a testament to her practice and the training that she did. It was gorgeous.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm so grateful that you were there with me and for all of your guidance throughout my pregnancy. I really feel my birth would not have been what it was if I hadn't have had you there. You were an amazing support, and I'm just so grateful for the wonderful birth experience I have, and I really credit that to you. When we're talking too about yoga and the subtle body, I feel that it was my practice that allowed me to keep that sense of ease and calm on that day when I had to be transferred to the hospital. I was going from a connection I had made with my midwife, somebody who I thought was going to be there at the birth of my daughter. And then all of a sudden, I am going to a hospital where I don't know who my doctor is going to be. All of this medical terminology is being thrown my way. And I just remember looking at you like, what? I don't get to go home? And there was that moment during active labor where they lost her heart rate. And everybody came rushing in to try to find the heart rate, to encourage me to get the baby out safely. And I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid at all because I knew that she was okay and I knew that I was okay. And that wasn't something that the mind could give me. It was only something that I could feel within. And it was almost as if her and I were in this space outside of the room together. And we were on this journey together. And that is what the beauty of that yoga practice is it's that deeper connection within, where you can just feel the experience. There's no thinking at all that is required.
That's why I feel like yoga is such a good complement to my birth-ease method, to moms that are doing hypnobirthing, moms, any mom really. You don't have to want a natural birth for it to be beneficial, but there is this synergistic effect that happens when you combine these relaxation practices with yoga and the breath. It all works so beautifully together.
Yes, and the breath is so important. Without the breath, there is no yoga practice. I find one of the worst classes to take during pregnancy is a Lamaze class, because they teach you the exact opposite way that you should be breathing during active labor or even early labor. When we think of the breath has a direct effect on the nervous system itself. We have two areas in which we breathe into the body. We either breathe into the chest or we breathe into the belly. When we're breathing into the chest, our breath is signaling to our nervous system, particularly our sympathetic nervous system, that we are now in a state of action. This is a state of flight or flight, and the body responds by increasing cortisol, which is our stress hormone. When cortisol is released, the body tenses up. So now we have a tense body, we have a tense breath, and we are trying to keep our calm and our cool, but our body's not cooperating, and that's because of the breath itself. When we breathe down to our navel center, we are breathing into our parasympathetic nervous system. And here, this is our body's way of signaling to us that we are safe, that we are secure, and that it is now okay for us to rest, relax, and to let go. And that is exactly what we need as women, not only during our pregnancy, but during our birth experience as well as postpartum. We need to have that feeling of safety, security, and the ability to rest and relax and to be comfortable in our body. And so when you come to a yoga class, you're going to be practicing that deeper belly breath, the complete opposite of the There's one thing you take from listening to us chat today. It's please to not ever use that breath.
Yes, it's how you breathe when you're stressed. When you're stressed, you're breathing in your chest instead of your belly. And what I find is fascinating is that the first place that tightens in our bodies as human beings when we're afraid is our pelvic floor. And I'm learning that there is a correlation between our pelvic floor and our diaphragm. So if you have a tight pelvic floor, it's affecting your diaphragm, it affects your breathing, the muscles in your shoulders and in even your neck engage so that your chest can open, because you're in fight or flight, so you can fill your lungs with more oxygen. And again, as Stephanie so beautifully explained, we're getting into sympathetic dominance. We're in fight or flight or freeze. And that is the exact opposite of what we want while we're giving birth. And I've even heard that there's a correlation between the sound of our voice and our pelvic floor. I was listening to it was this birth summit on the pelvic floor, and the woman speaking, and I wish I remembered her name, was talking about when a woman has a tight pelvic floor postpartum and she doesn't know how to relax it, she has them make very low sounds. Oh, because that relaxes the pelvic floor. So if their pelvic floor is not tight enough, or they can't draw up the pelvic floor, she'll have them speak in a real high squeaky voice because it pulls up the pelvic floor, because again there's that correlation between the throat, between our jaw, between our diaphragm and our bottom. And in birth we want women low sounds, not because that's panicky. Working with your sound and your breath is so important. I love it when women that do practice yoga will tone or say, Om. It just helps move the baby in the birth so beautifully.
Yes, and that was one thing that I also utilized during the time that I was bringing my daughter earthside. And just touching back to what you were discussing about tone and jaw in relation to the pelvic floor, my dear teacher, Paul Deligan, he said during my studies with him, when you can find the awe within your face, you can feel the awe within your body. And I believe it was Ina May Gaskin who said it was beneficial to have a smile on your face during labor and delivery. So when you have a smile on your face, you're actually relaxing the pelvic floor. And with the sound of Om itself, it is that deep vibrational sound that allows the women to release and to soften the pelvic floor. Within the yoga practice, we utilize the breath work with pelvic toning. Now, you want to think of strengthening the pelvis, but you also want to think of being able to relax the pelvic floor as well. So utilizing the breath in the two parts. So when we're looking at the yoga practice in relation to the pelvic floor, working with the breath work, when you're using the exhalation of the breath, you're actually allowing the pelvic floor to relax as well. And then at the end of the exhalation is where you want to lift through the pelvic floor. Take that deep, full breath into the belly. And then with the next exhalation of the breath, again, we're relaxing and releasing the pelvic floor. And as you're practicing this throughout those 9 months leading up to the day that you get to greet your baby, it's preparing the body to do what it naturally knows it will need to do. And again, you can take a step back from trying to think about, okay, well, now here I am. What is it I should be doing? Should I be lifting? Should I be contracting? Should I be releasing? What's going on down there? And again, you can just follow the breath. And the subconscious and unconscious mind have had that 9 months of practice where your body knows what it needs to do as long as you're using the breath. And again, maybe welcoming that deep Om to help relax and release through the pelvic floor.
Yes, because that's what we need to do. We need to release our baby into the world. And I think what can happen sometimes when women are giving birth, especially if they're in a facility where there's bright light shining down on their lady parts and people are screaming, 1, 2, 3, push, push, push. Women can become frightened. They can go into fight or flight, and their pelvic floor can tighten. If they are taking a breath in and then releasing it, like you're encouraged to do, and then take a breath in, and then they hold it and bear down, a lot of times women are pushing from the diaphragm up. They're pushing in their face, and they're not able to release from the diaphragm down. And again, there's that correlation between a tight pelvic floor and our diaphragm and our jaw. So it sounds like this practice would really be so beneficial to work with the breath to help release the baby. And I've heard it said by a pelvic health therapist that when you breathe in to begin to bear down, if you feel that urge, to take a moment and soften your pelvic floor and then bear down to release the baby.
Yes, exactly. And going back to the environment that you were talking about, where doctors or midwives are coming in, there's the bright lights, there's all of this stimulation. The yoga practice is also going to help that mama find, hopefully, that centeredness, that place where she can still feel at peace and at ease with what it is that she's experiencing. So one of the aspects of the yoga practice is the concept of non-attachment. So being very aware of your surroundings, very aware of the space that you are in, but not allowing that space to have an effect on what it is that you are feeling. And when a mama is trying to bring her baby earthside, that should be her sole focus. Her connection to her body, her connection to her breath, but most importantly, her connection with her baby. It is a journey, it is an experience that they are on together. And so being able to go within and to not be affected by the stressful type of environment that can be created for so many women on a day where that is the last thing that they need as far as support.
Yes, I agree, because the more peaceful the environment can be, generally the easier the birth is.
Or in my case, perhaps having that idea that you do want to have that type of environment and then things go awry, because we never know what's going to happen. I don't like the idea of birth plans. I like the idea of a birth draft. So having that idea of how you would hope that day to look like, but also being willing to flow and to change and to go with what needs to be done for both your baby and you to be safe and healthy.
Right. And I do agree, especially in your story, when your birth did take a turn that was unexpected. You used your tools to be able to go within and work with your body and bring your sweet girl gently into the world. And if we don't do some kind of preparation, then it's so easy to get sideswiped and overwhelmed. And I know for myself, when clients tell me, well, this wasn't the way I expected my birth to go. However, what I learned working with you, using my yoga practices, I was able to mitigate that and work through that and still stay centered and give birth to my baby.
And I can really give credit to the first midwife that I was working with when I found out that I was pregnant, because the day that I went in there, I told her right off the bat, it's like, okay, so I hope that you are okay with me having a natural birth, and I would like to do a water birth too, if that's possible. And she looked me in the eyes and she was like, I'm happy to support you in all those ways. She's like, but you better have a plan. She's like, you better take these 9 months to practice and to manifest what it is that you are desiring. She's like, I work with a lot of women who come in and they have this beautiful idea as to what they feel they want their birth to look like, but then they're not preparing the body physically as well as mentally and emotionally. And then when they are put into that almost stressful like environment, because there is a lot of stress that is going on. There's a whole lot that's going on within the body, and you have to be able to handle what it is that you're feeling emotionally, turning off the negative thoughts, the fears, the worries. What if this happens? What if that happens? And then having the strength of the body to endure 24 to 36 hours of some real intense activity.
I feel like yoga really helps to prepare women for the hard work that giving birth is. It prepares them in pregnancy. The physical effort of giving birth is compared to competing in a triathlon. And how many women really don't do anything to prepare for labor? And sometimes they're fine, but it's important. And especially if you're planning a natural birth, I feel like yoga helps to condition the body to do that really hard work, because there's points in labor where it is intense, it is uncomfortable, and having that conditioning can really help prepare you for that work. So can you speak a little bit about that, please?
Yes, definitely. And I agree 100%. I feel I would not have had the type of birth experience that I had with my daughter if it wasn't for my yoga practice, especially having the transfer to the hospital. If I hadn't done that work and prepared myself physically, mentally, spiritually, it would have been a completely different experience. One thing that was so beneficial for me was I was able to birth my daughter with 5 pushes. And I credit that for those 9 months of work that I did with the breath and the pelvic floor lift, as well as connecting to what it felt to release the pelvic floor. And one of the yoga poses that is really great during pregnancy is what we call the yogi squat. Now, I do not recommend practicing the yogi squat during the first roughly 5.5 to 6 months, because I like to err on the side of caution, because during those first 6 months, we want to make sure that we are encouraging baby to stay nice and high. But as we are transitioning into the third trimester, that's when we want to focus on our work as to what it feels to really release the pelvic floor. And as we're coming down into those deep yogi squats, so we're thinking of stepping the feet nice and wide, feet turned out at about a 45-degree angle, and then releasing the hips down to the mat or to the earth if you're outside practicing in the grass. And you can really connect with opening up through the hips. You're focusing on strengthening the legs. We're looking here at strengthening the quadriceps, the front of the thighs. We're looking at creating length here through the back of the thighs, the hamstrings. And we're also looking at the release of the pelvic floor. How does that feel physically? So that way I know what it will feel like within the breath as well.
It's so important. I think understanding how your pelvic floor works as you're releasing your baby is invaluable, because again, women can become afraid and tighten up and pull up, and this is very much a release. I feel like it's also a time to connect with and listen to your body and listen to your baby, and what is your body telling you in regards to bearing down and releasing the baby.
And then the yoga practice too is going to help postpartum. So when we're looking at our practice of those 9 months, not only are we preparing ourselves for that day that we need to now go out and participate in our triathlon, but we want to give the body the support that it needs to recover from that triathlon. Particularly, I like to call it the fourth trimester. So those first 3 months postpartum, when the body is trying to reintegrate. So now the hips, the pelvis that had separated to make room so that we could bring our baby through the birth canal, now it's slowly going to start to draw back together, as well as the abdominals. Now the stomach that got moved all the way over here, liver that was hanging out here, now all of that stuff has to come back. And so if we have that solid foundation where our muscle tone is healthy, our muscle tone is strong, as well as having the strength within the pelvic floor, we're going to help ourselves heal in a much better way, where we're not necessarily dealing with so much of an intense feeling with issues with sciatic, if there's any impingement on the sciatic nerve, because now the psoas is a little too tight, if there's a misalignment here when the hips are coming back together, as well as if we haven't been doing that pelvic floor work during those 9 months of pregnancy, now we could be also dealing with the issues of incontinence afterwards.
If a woman is having difficulty postpartum with incontinence or a soreness, prolapse, any of those types of issues, I think seeing a pelvic health therapist is very important. And a lot of people aren't even aware that there are physical therapists for our pelvic floor. But how can yoga complement that, or maybe help prevent potentially some of that trauma that can happen after we give birth?
Definitely. I feel the two go hand in hand, and I have found through my experience with some of the exercises that pelvic floor therapists utilize, they are the same types of exercises that are being taught within the yoga practice. Now, I want to encourage all women, after you have just given birth, now is not the time to start right into, let's do these pelvic floor lifts, let's get everything back where it needs to be. You want to honor that time for the body to continue to release and shed what the uterus needs to release. So taking that time, and then once we've moved into a space where we're no longer having those heavy states of bleeding postpartum, and it can be different for many type of women. For me, I want to say it was about 2 to 3 weeks where I had to let my body continue to release everything. And then when I was in a state where it was just a very light flow, and I went and I met with my midwife for that follow-up, the very first follow-up, then I got the green light to go ahead. And now let's go ahead and come back to starting out very slowly with these yoga exercises. And all it was for me was focusing on the lift of the pelvic floor, the release of the pelvic floor with the breath. And in that in itself, not only am I strengthening the pelvic floor, but I'm also strengthening the transverse abdominis. And the transverse abdominis is what supports the uterus. It's what supports the bladder. It's what supports all of the female internal organs.
Yes, and thank you for making that point, because I feel that women, for whatever reason, maybe it's our society, maybe it's the fact that often women have to go back to work at 6 weeks, which is a whole subject right there, which obviously I think is too soon. You can tell from the tone of my voice, but I think it's important, you said that so beautifully, to allow the body to rest. And I love what you said about allowing the body to shed and to heal. People forget that you have a wound the size of a dinner plate inside of your uterus because you can't see it. But that's how big a healthy placenta is. And our body needs that time to heal. And I feel like if we start to work out too quickly postpartum, that it can actually cause more harm than good. At least that's my thought process in it.
Yeah, that's definitely correct. And when we're looking at the study of yoga practice, so yoga is actually a science. And so there is science to everything. There is reason to everything that we do within the practice. And just as it is postpartum, it is the same for women who are menstruating. And then there is some debate. Some women like to practice during their menstruation. But in the tradition of yoga, it is recommended that you take the first 3 days as what we call days of rest for the cycle to begin. And the same should be done postpartum as well. We call that the release of the prana, the release of the energy that has been housed here in the uterus. So every time we're coming into our cycle, it's as if the body is now preparing for perhaps the implantation of the embryo. And if it doesn't happen, now we have to release what the body was preparing as far as life energy. The same goes postpartum. We have carried that life energy within us for 9 months. The body has just worked on releasing it. And now we need to allow that body its time to continue to release. Your uterus is going to naturally contract postpartum. And it's going to be moving from the size of a small watermelon to, once you've had your baby, drawing down to the size of a grapefruit. And it's going to continue to contract from there. And we want to honor that time. So within the yoga practice, it is recommended that if you have had a vaginal birth, that you want to avoid coming back into the practice for 6 weeks. If you have had a cesarean, you want to allow 8 weeks. Now, that doesn't mean any type of practice at all. You can, again, begin with those pelvic floor lifts and release, utilizing the breath work once the flow of blood has become very light and we're not having to use those really thick, heavy pads and having to change them. And again, it's going to be different for every woman because we're unique. Our bodies are unique. It's always best to check with your midwife, check with your doctor to make sure that you have that clearance to begin.
Yes, and if you overdo it postpartum, you're going to bleed more too. I always used to tell women when I worked at the birth center and was discharging them that if your flow starts to turn bright red 3 days postpartum, your body's telling you that you are doing too much. It should be transitioning into darker red at that point. Big gushes, bright red blood in those first few days means you're overdoing it. And we need to honor and listen to our bodies. It's so important. So, is there anything else If you could share any bit of wisdom that you would like our birthies families to know, what would that be, Stephanie?
One thing I would like to say that I didn't get to touch on, and if you want to do a little bit more research for those who are listening out in the world to this podcast, with regards to the yoga nidra practice. Yoga nidra is a practice of yoga. However, there is no movement in this type of practice. Within the yoga nidra practice, it's all about turning on the parasympathetic nervous system. And this type of practice is going to be very beneficial, I find, in the postpartum stage, because women were dealing with perhaps maybe 2 to 3 hours of sleep in intervals as we are getting used to sleep cycle of our baby, being there to feed our baby, and all that goes into those first 3 to 6 months. And they say that the practice of yoga nidra, a 20-minute practice, is equivalent to 4 hours of REM sleep. It's a very beneficial and powerful practice to help heal the body. You're working with the subconscious, you're working with the unconscious mind, and you're creating the space for the body to go into that deep state of rest. So when we're looking at the yoga practice, we don't have to look at it as just simple exercises. We don't have to look at it as just simple stretches. We can look at it as so much more. We can look at it, again, it's a science. It's a way for us to prepare our body, to support our body, and to give our body what it needs in order for us to just be able to show up in a space where we can feel centered and not affected by our environment, the spaces. And when we do feel those effects, being able to ride those waves of emotions, being able to handle the stress of now motherhood and all that comes with it.
Thank you. And I do feel that yoga is so beneficial for mitigating stress. It's one of the best ways to do that, along with meditation, which is a part of the practice as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on and just allowing me this space to hopefully be of some support to any women out there.
So if someone wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
That's a good question, because me and modern technology, we don't go hand in hand too well. I do have a website out there. It is stephaniesmithyoga.com. There you can find my teaching schedule. You can find an email as well if you would like to connect with me. You can also find me on Instagram at The Traveling Yogini, and I am also on Facebook at Stephanie Smith.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And I'm hoping soon that Stephanie and I will be collaborating in my birthies method. She'll be teaching a yoga component, and I'm so excited to see where all of this goes. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you again, Stephanie.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends and rate and recommend it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to trust your inner wisdom. Do your research. You already know your baby better than anyone else. There's no right way to give birth or correct way to parent. There's simply the way that feels best for you. Listen to your baby or child. They will guide you. The beautiful thing is, as you continue to grow and evolve as a parent, what feels best may grow and evolve as well. And that is okay, because our children are truly our teachers.
For more great conversations like these, or to find out more information and access Michelle's library of amazing guests, go to birthiesservices.com/podcast. For more information on the Birthies method, Michelle's classes, meditations, and other services, go to birthiesservices.com.